Hi, thanks for being with us on Walking Through the Scriptures. Today, we're going to start a new series. We're going to be in the book of Jonah. I love the book of Jonah, and over the last 4 to 5 years, my level of love for it has totally grown. And one of the primary reasons that I love the book is the view that I get of God. We get to see God in an all out, endless pursuit of humanity. He's trying to win back his servant Jonah and then also the nation of Assyria. He's trying to win them back to his side before he has to destroy them for their disobedience. And so I simply love the story. And I hope that as we go through 4, maybe 5 videos talking about the book of Jonah, that you and I will be blessed. So let's just jump into it. Jonah chapter 1. We'll start at verse number 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for its evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. And he went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. Then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish. Here in the text, we see that God is trying to get a message to Nineveh. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, and they're a very wicked nation. And they've pretty much exhausted God's patience, but God is giving them a warning, or He wants to give them a warning, and He's going to send that through His messenger, Jonah. Now, Jonah is a prophet, and that's what prophets do. They speak in the place of God. And so, this message God is trying to get to Nineveh should go through Jonah, his messenger. But Jonah promptly rejects this mission. And the text says that he's fleeing from God. And what this looks like is that he's trying to get as far away from Nineveh as possible. And that would be represented by going to a city called Tarshish. Now, in order to get to Tarshish, he's not going to be able to take commercial travel like we would today. That's obvious. As a matter of fact, commercial travel really doesn't exist in their day and age. There are vessels that would be going from one destination to the next, but those vessels are primarily cargo vessels. They're freight liners, if you will. And so Jonah is going to board one of those freight liners in order to get to where he's going. Enter into the story the mariners or the sailors. These sailors, again, are freighters. They are moving cargo from one destination to the next, and they have a side hustle. That side hustle is carrying people as well. And it's this side hustle that is going to introduce them to danger. It is going to introduce them to fear. It is going to introduce them to great loss. And ultimately, they're going to end up doing something that they would have never thought that they would do in their lives. And all of this will be because they let the wrong person aboard their ship. And so, what I want to do today is I want to encourage us to take a look at the people and the things that we have in our lives and assess whether or not they're helping us or hurting us with respect to our main mission, our main purpose. Now, for these sailors, this side hustle of carrying people, there's nothing wrong with doing that. As a matter of fact, very necessary that they do this service for people. As I mentioned, there is no other form of commercial travel. And so, this side hustle of theirs is very much important. But there are many things in our lives, similarly, that aren't wrong. There's nothing wrong with doing them. We can have any number of activities, any number of people in our lives, and there be nothing wrong with those people, nothing wrong with those activities, but we just simply need to gauge and ensure that those things are not pulling us away from the main thing. Let's continue with the text. In verse number 7, they are fearful. And they've already started to unload the cargo, and they're trying to figure out what is going on. And they start to identify that there's something supernatural happening here. And so let's pick up in verse number 7. And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lots fell on Jonah. Now, just very quickly, this casting of lots, think of it as rolling dice. And the belief and the takeaway was that whoever the dice landed upon, like let's say that each person picked a number, that would determine what you were looking for. And in this case, they're trying to figure out who did something such that we're in this state, this storm that we're dealing with. And as you would have it, the lots fell on Jonah. Verse number 8. Then they said to him, "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What's your country? And of what people are you?" And he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." And the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this that you've done?" For the man knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he had told them. And see, Jonah is answering their questions. They want to know, what is happening? What have you done? And he goes and explains who he is, but more importantly, he explains who his God is. Now, this is in time where many people are pagan, and there are so many gods out there. And so they want to know, who's your God? And when he says, "My God is the one who created everything, the sky, the land, the water in which we're floating upon and struggling against," they are terrified. And one of the reasons they're terrified is because of a piece of information they had previously received from him. The NIV makes it very clear. It says, "This terrified them, and they asked, 'What have you done?'" They knew that he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. They already knew that Jonah was running from the Lord. Now, in their time, they probably didn't think much of it. Hey, this guy's got something going on with him and his God. That's between him and his God. It didn't bother them. Essentially, what they had done is they had ignored all the warning signs. This person was in a very bad spot. This person was very wrong for them. This person was going to derail them for their mission. And they totally missed all the signs. And I honestly can relate to this. There were times in my life, and specifically in college, where I was headed in a particular direction and I saw something and I saw somebody and I allowed them into my life knowing that they had the absolute power to completely derail it. As a matter of fact, knowing 100% that their direction was totally contrary to the direction that I wanted to go, and I let them on board my life altogether. And this is something that I want to encourage us to take a look at and to not fall for. There are so many things, and I say this at the risk of being redundant to things that I've said in previous videos, but I think it's really important that we assess what's in our lives, that we assess what we're watching and its ability to desensitize us to sin. That all that we see and all that we hear, that it can just simply make those senses and our sensitivity to sin completely dull. And we begin to accept behavior that God frowns upon. And worse, we might even begin to exhibit it in our lives. We have to be careful about what we're listening to and how we allow it to influence us and our viewing of other people, and these programming and their ability to completely change how we view people and change how we feel whether they're deserving of our love. And in the end, we lose our ability to love God as He wants us to love Him, or love people as we would want to be loved ourselves. And our overall mission, being children of God, we're slowly being derailed from. And so I want to encourage you to really look at who and what we have aboard our spiritual ship of life, if you will. Continuing on with the text, let's pick up in verse number 11. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us?" For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. And he said to them, "Pick me up, hurl me into the sea, then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. I mentioned before that this storm that these men were being exposed to was going to bring them great danger, that they were going to go through great fear, that they were going to suffer great loss, and they were going to end up doing something that they never would imagine that they would do. And here we have that thing that they never would imagine that they would do. When they inquire, "What should we do so that the storm will calm down?" Jonah says, "Throw me overboard and kill me." I'm imagining that when they started this journey, they never thought that they would have to throw someone overboard. I'm imagining when they chose the occupation of being a mariner, they never thought that in order to save their lives, they would have to throw people over a ship. And this is the situation that they find themselves in. And frankly, this is not a situation of their making, of their choosing. The storm is not really their fault. They just happen to be in the middle of it. And not just them. I'm imagining that there are other ships that are on the sea at this moment in time, and they're suffering through the exact same storm. And being knowledgeable mariners, they're going through the exact same steps. They're tossing their cargo overboard. They're praying to their God, all in hopes that they will survive this storm. And yet, those other ships, they will never be informed of why they're being exposed to that storm. And that happens to us sometimes in life. We just go through things and we never know the why. And maybe one day we'll find out, but most likely not. But the men, the mariners in this story, they do find out. And they're presented with a choice: throw this man overboard. And they are so wanting not to do this. The text says in verse number 13 that they rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they just couldn't do so because the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. And so ultimately, what they decided to do was to throw Jonah overboard. And I think that's a note for us, that there are some things that we can have in our lives, and we've been trying to work around it. We've been trying to improve it. We've been praying on it that somehow this thing or this person in our lives can coexist with us in harmony with our main purpose. And it just can't. There are some things that are so harmful for us that we just simply have to get it out of our lives. We have to, if you will, throw it overboard. And Jonah, in this case, needed to be thrown overboard if these men were going to be able to be saved. And there's so many things in our lives that could fall into that category. And I mentioned them earlier. If programming is causing you to be less like Christ, if it's causing you to be desensitized to the sins of this world, then you need to get that programming out of your life. And that might include some drastic steps like completely cutting your cable service or your streaming service so that you don't have the opportunity to fall into that again. It may be that whatever person in your life, you need to delete them out of your phone. Just delete that contact altogether. You might even need to completely change your phone number to get away from that person, to get them out of your life. It may be that you need to cut internet altogether and get rid of your smartphone and get a dumb phone. And I say that for any men that might be struggling with pornography. It may simply be that you need to completely disconnect from that mode of access to that type of content. Whatever the case may be, if you evaluate in your life something that is pulling you away from the main thing, you need to dump it out of your life. You need to offload it or kick it off board your ship. I hope this is helpful for you. There's so many more stories or so many more angles in the book of Jonah, and each one of them gives us a glimpse of God. In this story, you can see what God is doing in order to win Jonah back. You can see what he's doing on some level to win the mariners. Notice what happens to the mariners. In verse number 16, it says, Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly. They offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. These men, though suffering great loss, though doing something they never would have thought that they would do, and frankly, they probably don't know that a whale or a great fish came and swallowed up Jonah and that Jonah lived. They probably go the rest of their lives thinking that they've killed a man. And yet, they still are able to come to the realization of who the true God is, and they begin to worship him. And that's a takeaway for us as well, that we should never let a storm go to waste, that we should use it and allow us to grow closer to God and deeper in his service. I want to encourage you to read the book of Jonah. It's really short. It's 48 verses. You can probably get through it in 12 to 15 minutes. And so read it a couple of times. Read it from a couple of translations. And that way we'll be able to fully engage in this story as we move forward. Again, I want to encourage you to evaluate who and what you have on board your ship of life. And if there's any changes that you need to make, go ahead and make them. I'll leave you with this last verse from the author of Hebrews. It's Hebrews chapter 12. He says, Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us.